Hello everybody, this is part 1 of my Greenskins lore video. Let's just dive on in. From the deepest, darkest tunnels they came, burrowing and banging, shouting and smashing. We soon learnt not to try to negotiate, save with axes and cannons. For thousands upon thousands of years we have fought them, and many think we will soon be defeated. Yet we have our plans, and someday we will take back our ancestral holds, or else destroy both those homes and the foul orcs who now pollute them. That was a quote by Geilar Kunst, a dwarven lore master, and that comes from Warhammer Fantasy roleplay. So, the Greenskins, one of my favourite races in the world of Warhammer Fantasy, and they will always hold a special place in my heart. But let's stick to the lore. The Greenskins are a highly primitive, bestial, humanoid race of green-skinned barbarians and raiders whose sole pursuit in life is that of war and battle. Greenskins occupy much of the eastern hemisphere of the known world. The term Greenskins is a common collective description used by many civilized realms to refer to the forces of the orcs, goblins, and other biologically related subraces such as the Noblars. The broadest division is between the orcs, who are strong, brutish, and savage warriors, whereas the goblins are smaller and weaker, but more cunning and conniving creatures. The Greenskins are considered by many to be the scourge of all other mortal civilizations. These tribal warriors are extremely violent, raiding ceaselessly, carrying war and barbarism to all corners of the known world. Time and again, hordes of Greenskins would arise without warning and lay a great swathe of destruction that has no direction or purpose other than simple violence. Indeed, the Greenskin race's single motive is violence, an ever-increasing mass of warfare that has the potential to dominate and cover the entire world in a seething green tide. However, the Greenskins' tendency for warfare has created a division within their society that has ensured their race shall never reach such heights. Since the dawn of their history, the Greenskins have been plagued by a never-ending series of civil wars that has consumed millions of their own kind. For such is their desire for battle, the Greenskin tribes have been known to fight each other just as much they fight the other civilized races of the old world. Though such strife should spell doom for their race, such are the Greenskins' ability to both survive and thrive in the harshest of environments that they can never truly be exterminated from the face of the world. Without the proper knowledge or unity to progress past even the most basic foundations for a civilization, the Greenskins never seem to amount to anything more than primitive savages living within scattered tribal societies. The Greenskin race arrived in the world at some unknown point in the world's prehistory. The most likely explanations are that their insidious spores were either mistakenly introduced to the world by the Old Ones, or that they drifted through space and arrived in the world by some other means. Ever since then, the Greenskins have spread to become an ever-present and belligerent enemy of the other races. So primitive and backwards were the Greenskins during the earlier years of their existence that the only sensible record of their history will always be kept by the very nations that they have attacked and conquered. The first records of their existence was written and kept by the dwarfs during the golden age of their people, around the time of the horrific catastrophe known by their race as the Time of Woes. That was when the Skaven shattered the world. Mentioned that in another video, but anyway. The Great Migration and the Cataclysm of the Time of Woes. At and around an unspecific point of time, The Greenskin race has grown considerably in numbers and have since occupied a large stretch of territory within the eastern hemisphere of the world. With little to no records detailing its exact location, what was certain, however, was that upon the year around 1500 IC, a great cataclysm rippled through the very foundations of the world. Great tremors rocked the mountains like the banging of thunder, massive tidal waves rose from the sea and crashed against the coast, and finally, long dormant volcanoes erupted within the east, and the land was scarred for eternity by geysers, lava, and earthquakes. Dislodged from their original homelands by the volcanic activity, the Greenskin race was forced to migrate towards the west. As this mighty migration moved out of the east, the petty tribal kingdoms of mankind rose up to face their savage assault. However, the humans couldn't match their bronze swords with the orcs' iron cleavers, and were thusly beaten down time and again. Battered and broken, the tribes of mankind were also forced into a mass exodus to the west, hoping to enter into the safety of the old world that lies beyond the stalwart mountain walls of the World's Edge Mountains. Like a green tide, the Greenskins hordes swept unopposed in their rampage until finally they as well reached the foothills of the World's Edge Mountains. Upon those distant peaks, the Greenskins fell upon the ancient and once powerful civilization of the dwarf race. Attacking from above and below, the Greenskins surged through the broken battlement of their once mighty holds and killed all in their path. Thus began a time of warfare that the humans and dwarves have appropriately named the Goblin Wars. For the goblins were the most numerous of the Greenskin invaders at that point in time. The Goblin Wars, 1449 to 250 IC. The first attack came just after the last aftershock had finished. Unidentified enemies infiltrated the dwarfs' underground networks in impeccable numbers, and soon outposts and small strongholds came under attack. With the walls and gates of their once formidable fortress now cracked open by the earthquakes, the scattered dwarfs quickly became outnumbered and overrun. The first to fall from this massive onslaught was the dwarf stronghold of Castello. Taking advantage of the chaos, a wave of night goblin tribes emerged within the very centre of the city, taking the dwarves of Castello completely by surprise. Using their speed and overwhelming numbers, the night goblins took level after level from the dwarves, defiant to the last. Knots of warriors and militia rose up to meet the invaders back to back, attempting to hold the night goblins off in key locations until the population could evacuate. The king of Castello, King Kargson of the Stonehelm clan, led a counter-attack that gave enough time for the women and children to evacuate. With all of the population accounted for, the king ordered his people to finally abandon the city and make their journey towards the strongholds of Kadrin and Zufbar. King Kargson never made it, for he valiantly closed the tunnels behind him as the enemy began their final decisive assault. With the enemies controlling both the surface and the underground tunnels, communication between the holds were lost. The next attack upon the dwarves came upon the mineral-rich stronghold of Castello, known famously for having the largest deposits of gromril in the entire world. When the great earthquake struck, the lower workings of the stronghold became flooded by the nearby lake of Blackwater. Without any warning, Skaven expeditionary armies coming from the city of Skavenblight attacked the lower workings, while an army of orcs besieged the city from above. Caught between two massive armies, the dwarves stood little chance. Despite the stout defences erected by the dwarves, after nearly a single year of constant fighting, the city of Castello was inevitably taken. Most of the stubborn population fought to the bitter end, with only a handful of clans managing to evacuate and reach the safety of its sister hold, Zufbar. After the fall of Castello, a series of defeats were further inflicted upon the dwarves at many different locations within the World's Edge Mountains. Columns of smoke rose high above the peaks as surface settlements and mines were put to the torch. Refugees that survived the attacks attempted to cross the mountain passes to reach the other holds, but these places were clogged with enemy armies streaming into dwarf territory like a flood. As the war escalated, the Underway became a war zone between armies of night goblins and Skaven seeking to control the underground tunnel highway as their own. To the south, the mines of Ekrund was sacked by an army of orcs, driving the dwarves out of the resource-rich region known as the Dragonback Mountains. The gold and brimstone mines of Gumbad were also taken by a host of night goblins of the Red-Eye tribe. After being besieged for several decades, the strongholds of Mount Silverspear was lost to the orcs as well. In time, the entire eastern edge of the World's Edge Mountains was lost to the Greenskins. The dwarves eventually lost 3 more major strongholds in the span of 50 years. Carrack 8 Peaks, the second strongest mountain kingdom of the dwarves, fell to the Greenskins in 513 IC. Carrack Asgal was stormed and sacked by an orc army in 493 IC, only to be forced out as a dragon delved into the tunnels and claimed the hold as his own. Carrack Draza was attacked and captured by the orcs the very same year, eventually becoming the new greenskin fortress of Black Crag. After nearly 1,000 years, the Goblin Wars were coming to an end, and should the dwarves not stop the Greenskins soon, nothing would stop them from conquering the whole of the Old World. The War Against Humanity, 250 to 1 IC. In the past, the World's Edge Mountains were considered by many to be a large barrier that kept the horrors of the East at bay. With the kingdom of the dwarves now under siege and buckling under an unrelenting assault, cracks have begun to appear, and like a great flood the Greenskins poured out of the mountain passes and spilled towards the lowlands of the Old World. It was upon those lands that the Greenskins once more met the tribes of mankind, and over the next 250 years, the Greenskins, with their impeccable numbers and superior iron weapons and armour, were slowly but surely beginning to win. In their most dire times, the dwarves saw within humanity a common ally from which they could together stop the Greenskin threat. Within time, trade flourished between man and dwarf, and soon the human tribesmen were given access to the secrets of crafting iron weaponry. However, even with the aid of the dwarfs, the human tribes were far too fractious to put up a valiant effort. Just when all hope seemed lost, a mighty warrior prince had arisen to become the new chieftain of the Umberogan tribe, and had since begun a campaign of unification, diplomacy, and warfare that threatened to dislodge the Greenskins from the Old World. This uniter was Sigmar Heldenhammer, a warrior king of unparalleled strength and bravery, who had a grand dream of uniting the warring tribes of men together to form a powerful and unified nation that would be a bastion of hope for all humanity. This all began on one historic day that would bound the race of man and dwarf into oaths of everlasting friendship. A trading convoy that included the High King Kurgan Ironbeard of the dwarves was ambushed on its way from Karaz-a-Karak in the Grey Mountains. The Orc army that attacked them was enormous, and although the battle-hardened dwarves slew the Orcs until their bodies lay in heaps, they inevitably failed, and their High King was taken captive. Luckily for the beleaguered dwarves, this territory was the domain of the Umberogan tribe, a fierce and warlike tribe of men who fought relentlessly to clear the land of Greenskins. Led by their mighty warrior prince Sigmar Heldenhammer, the Umberogan army fell upon the Orc army with cold impunity. This meeting would be a turning point in mankind's history. In the battle that transpired, Kurgan Ironbeard bore witness to this young human prince facing down a massive orc known in their tongue as Vagraz Headstomper. Despite young Sigmar's mighty strength, every killing blow his bronze sword had made was turned aside by the armour of the orc, and every blow from the orc's flaming axe came all too close to ending his young life. Ironbeard broke free of his bonds and fought his way to Vagraz's tent, where the orc kept his pick of the dwarf king's possession. Inside he found the mighty warhammer Gal Maraz, the splitter of skulls. Kurgan threw the hammer towards Sigmar, cursing the orc with every curse known to dwarf kind. Sigmar caught the ancient weapon, and the tide turned for the Umberogan. Sigmar assaulted the orc with mighty strikes of his hammer, the fury of his blows bringing the hulking beast down to a single knee. With the final strike, Sigmar smashed the orc's skull to bloody shards, a mighty feat even for a warrior wielding a weapon forged with dwarven skill. With the close of the battle, their holdings avenged, Sigmar attempted to return the hammer to the High King. In that moment, a historical act came about, one unheard of in all the annals of both men and dwarves, and forever forged an unbreakable bond of friendship between the men of the lands of the west of the mountains and the dwarven kingdom of Karaz and Kor. On that day, Kurgan Ironbeard gifted the ancient hammer Galmaraz to Sigmar. It was a unique happening for such a unique weapon, for the power of Galmaraz is old, ancient even to the dwarves, and it is said that the weapon possesses a will of its own, and it actively chooses those who are to bear it into battle. Indeed, as fate would have it, the hammer was always Sigmar's, and had been waiting for the day the warrior would claim it. The Dwarven King looked upon Sigmar and saw within him power, honour, courage, and nobility without parallel, and knew that Galmaraz was rightfully his. And he also reasoned that an ancient runic weapon was fitting payment for saving the life of a Dwarven High King. From then on, the Dwarf, Mountain Kingdoms and the Umberogan clans were the most steadfast of allies. With the mighty Warhammer in his possession, Sigmar began his campaign to unite the warring tribes of men against the interminable onslaught of the Greenskin hordes. As Kurgan Ironbeard returned to his seat of power within Karaz Akarak, it soon became clear that the Greenskins were growing near unstoppable. In the years that followed Sigmar's campaign of unification, the dwarves within their mountain kingdoms have felt an invasion unlike anything they have endured before. Holding the Greenskin hordes off as much as they could, after nearly a decade, Sigmar had finally united the tribes into a single unified force, and it did not come at a better time. Envoys of King Kurgan Ironbeard arrived with news of an orc horde of such monumental scale as to eclipse all those before it, marching towards the now legendary region known famously as Blackfire Pass, intent on destroying the races of both man and dwarf forever. This Sigmar would not allow. He summoned all of his brother kings to the golden halls of King Sigurd for a grand meeting now known in the annals of history as the Council of 11. There the kings conferred on how they would face this apocalyptic threat. Some of the assembled kings realized that the only path was to unite into one great host, placing the overall command of the army under Sigmar. Others, however, would not bring themselves to relinquish command over their own warriors to another king, and remained obstinate. Soon, a dissension and argument arose between the assembled warlords. Sigmar saw this and was filled with contempt, silencing the dissent with a word. He denounced the shamefulness of their squabbles, while a lesser race stood united and poised to destroy humanity. Sigmar employed the gathering tribes not to meet the orcs and goblins as they had in the past, standing apart from each other, refusing to lend aid and combine their forces when needed. That would only lead to their defeat and deaths. His voice raising with a terrible rage that was felt throughout the gathering, Sigmar called on all the tribes of men to unite and make their common stand with the dwarves, calling it the crucible of a new nation. As recorded in the Book of Origins, Sigmar's final shout of "to war" was answered with a cheer so loud that the dwarves heard it as far away as Blackfire Pass. History records that Sigmar's army arrived just in time, as the orcs finally breached the wall King Kurgan had built across Blackfire Pass. Leading the charge from the chariot of Sigurd, chieftain of the Burgundians, Sigmar fell upon the Greenskins as if he were the god Ulrich himself. The force of the human assault stopped the orc and goblin advance, then began pushing it back. The dwarfs saw this as their opportunity and charged from their forts and towers and fell upon the Greenskins' flanks. At this point, fear overcame the Greenskins and they began to break ranks and flee. Their leader, Warlord Urgluk Bloodfang, rallied his forces and made a counterattack. Charging, he and his warband came face to face with Sigmar. Sigmar and the Orc Warlord entered into single combat, whilst Sigurd and his elite Burgundian warriors battled Bloodfang's Black Orc bodyguards. Hammer clashed with Cleaver as the two struggled for advantage. After nearly an hour of fighting, Sigmar killed the Orc Warlord with a mighty double blow, first breaking the hand that held the cleaver, then smashing Bloodfang's skull on the return stroke. The death of their leader was also the death of the Orc army, which broke and ran in utter panic. The slaughter that followed was terrible to behold, as the armies of men and dwarf fell upon their most hated of enemies. It is said that there has never been a greater concentration of crows in all the world that was gathered to feast on the stinking and unburied corpses of the Greenskins at Blackfire Pass. So many died that day that it would be over 1,000 years before the orcs and goblins could again raise such an army, even with their prodigious, if unknown, reproduction rates. With the defeat of the orcs at the Battle of Blackfire Pass, the security of the lands of the 12 tribes was finally assured. King Marbad was afforded the funeral rites of the greatest heroes, for such he deserved, and was carried onto his pyre by his fellow kings and his heir. Not only was the race of man saved, but so was the dwarven domain. In heartfelt gratitude, King Kurgan Ironbeard pledged that he would charge Alaric with the creation of 12 magnificent blades in thanks to the Empire for their shared brotherhood. These blades would be later known as the original 12 Runefangs, which continue to be wielded by the Counts of the Empire to this day. After the battle, Sigmar's fame spread wide and far, renowned as a hero of all mankind. Upon the anvil of war and the fires of battle, at last his dream of a united empire had been realized, for men of all tribes had stood together in the battle line as brothers, and with the truth of their common enemy now made obvious, the old tribal hatreds had evaporated away, replaced only by iron-hard ties of brotherhood. With the victory, it is said that the kings and their tribesmen all dropped to a knee within the pass before Sigmar, accepting him as their new lord. Thus, at Reichdorf, 1 year after the Battle of Blackfire Pass, the Ulrich, High Priest of the Cult of Ulrich, placed a crown of gold and ivory, a gift from the dwarves, upon Sigmar's head and proclaimed him the Emperor of Mankind before the assembled representatives of the human tribes. Before him knelt the tribal chiefs, who swore brotherhood to each other and fealty to Emperor Sigmar and the new empire. The War of the Greenskins. After the defeat at the Battle of Blackfire Pass, the Greenskin population of the Old World was culled to a manageable level, allowing the kingdoms of man and dwarf to reclaim many of their lost territories. Greatly reduced in numbers, the Greenskins were pushed out of many holds within the World's Edge Mountains. However, the major holds such as Carrack Ungor, Carrack Varn, Carrack Eight Peaks and many more were far too heavily infested to properly dislodge, thus allowing the Greenskins to keep a firm foothold within the Old World for many centuries to come. Over time, the Greenskins would eventually regain their once formidable strength and once again attack the kingdoms of man and dwarf relentlessly. However, these raids are often small, easily dispatched and insignificant. It is only when a massive war is formed that the Greenskins become once more a major threat. As such, the remaining history of the Greenskins are often divided up between several major war events, each led by an equally notorious warlord. The invasion of Tilia, 475 to 1239 IC. In 475, a vast horde of Greenskins invaded Tilia from the east. The Tilian merchants were not used to fighting foreign invaders. Most of their battles were against each other. The sudden appearance of brutal green-skinned savages burning crops, torching farms, and making off with merchant caravans was quite a shock. It is known several of the most powerful merchants got together and hired the biggest army ever seen in Tilia up until that time. The mercenary army marched out to meet the Orc tribes. The Tilian general pitched his tents on one side of a mighty river from where he could observe the Orcs' crude encampment. Obviously, he was pretty appalled at the mess and ruin that the Orcs had caused on the other side of the river. The thought of such crude and uncultured creatures running loose in Tilia was too awful to contemplate. The Tilians decided that rather than fight the Orcs, they would simply hire half the Orc army to fight the other half. That way, no matter which side won, the Tilians couldn't possibly lose. What's more, the spoils won by the victorious half would pay for the cost of hiring them. How exactly this was accomplished is not recorded, but the plan worked is beyond doubt. The Orcs were promptly defeated. The Orcs who had been hired for the battle were promptly re-employed and sent off to the frontier under the command of a Tilian general to beat up the Orc tribes that were still there. Since that day, the Tilians had cheerfully employed mercenaries of many races. Encouraged by the willingness of Tilians to pay for good soldiers regardless of race, mercenary bands have flocked to Tilia to find work. As a result, Tilia has become a melting pot where soldiers from many lands can be found. The Battle of Monte Castello, 2400 to 2401 IC. A second attempt to conquer Tilia was made in 2400 IC during the siege of Monte Castello. The garrison, reduced to only 500 Tilians, suddenly found itself surrounded by over 100,000 Greenskins, led by a certain Unguth the Vile, who was determined to capture it as a prelude to invading Tilia itself. The garrison of Castello, beating off countless assaults and enduring endless weeks of bitter siege warfare, dwindled by a few men every day, whilst the Orc horde was constantly reinforced by numerous fresh contingents eager to join the mighty Orc army. Cut off by land, the Castello was supplied by sea until this route was maliciously cut by the warships of an unknown enemy desiring to see the fortress fall once and for all. To this day, no one knows for sure who attacked the supply galleys. Tilians often accuse the corsairs of Araby or the pirates, but the most ominous rumour holds that the ships were overrun by an infestation of rats as part of the evil schemes of the Skaven. Starving and desperate, the garrison held out for more than a year, until the mercenary commander, the old and resolute Castello, was mortally wounded whilst repelling another orc assault. He was hurried from the ramparts into the commandery. Residing in the Castello at the time was this general's formidable and spirited daughter, Mona Lisa. Despite her efforts to staunch the blood, old Castello succumbed to his wounds. Mona Lisa, fearing that the garrison would lose heart, donned her father's armour and, pretending to be Castello himself, led the garrison into repelling 3 more attacks in the following days. After the 3rd attack, Mona Lisa lost her helmet and her long flowing tresses were seen by the troops. They demanded to know what had happened to their leader. When it was revealed that he was dead, the mercenaries were disheartened. They resolved to stake it all on one last sally, abandoning the Castello in a desperate attempt to escape back to Tilia. Mona Lisa implored them not to sally out to certain death and thereby let the Castello fall into enemy hands, but no persuasion, not even promises of enormous rewards in gold, could make them change their minds. Then Mona Lisa pointed out that if the orcs took Castello, they would certainly deface Tintoverdi's masterpiece, the 5 Seasons, which adorned the banqueting room in the Castello. This was thought to be the finest fresco in all Tilia, if not the world. She begged all of those who were willing to stay and defend this treasure to the death to step forward. The rest could go if they wished. One by one, soldiers stepped forward, tears in their eyes, saying, "I will die before orcs scrawl upon Tintoverdi, and no orc shall ever gaze upon the image of spring," and similar such things. Eventually the entire company resolved to remain to the bitter end. The siege continued for a further 3 months, and the Castello did not fall. Mona Lisa herself was mortally wounded by a goblin arrow on the day the Castello was relieved by an enormous army marching from Lucini. The relieving force broke and scattered the orc horde. They found only 25 pikemen still alive in the Castello. Around the walls, the greenskin corpses lay so thick that the moat had been filled up and was firm enough to bear the weight of orc siege towers. Ever since the Great Siege of Monte Castello, Mona Lisa had become a symbol of good fortune and victory. So much so that it is tradition for mercenary battle standards to depict Attilian war goddess Mimerdia with the features of Mona Lisa, as portrayed by the famous portrait of her by Celabotti.